Hey everybody, it's Don. On this episode of The Naturalist, I'm at the site where we did Sugar Shack 2024 in Hocking County, Ohio, to talk about some odds and ends of things that are happening here this spring. So let's go. Well, birds are doing their thing this time of year, and what I'd like to show you behind my head here is a nest of a bird called a phoebe. And this bird often puts its nests on buildings, against buildings, on any type of little raised spot where they could get some traction, and they build a stick, mud, and moss nest that can last for years. They'll come back and repair it each year, but it'll be there for many years. They'll reuse the same nest over and over again. They can nest a couple times a year, even if, for example, their early brood gets lost for some reason, or I have a bee flying around my head. So they can come back to the same nest the second time and have a second brood if necessary. So let's take a look at the nest and then crawl up and see what's happening in that nest right now. And of course, Mom's skirting around the area right now, a little bit afraid of me, obviously. So I'll try to catch her later if I can. Let's take a look at this nest. So that's what the structure of a phoebe nest looks like. It's on top of a little lamp here. And you can see in that nest, there are a lot of grass. There's mud, some roots, and moss that it collects from to sort of top it off, okay, to build a nice, soft, fluffy nest for its young. So I'm going to climb this ladder now and take a look at what's inside that nest. All right, so there you go. There's phoebe eggs. So how many are in there? What's that, about 4? I can't see, actually. My head's stuck over here, but pretty small. They're kind of the size of a marble. And, I saw the mother out here earlier, and she's incubating these eggs. So I wanted to film this and get out of here, leave her alone. So those eggs will hatch probably within the week, and she'll incubate those babies and feed them and everything for several weeks, I'd say. I'm not exactly sure how long for a phoebe. And then one day they'll be mature enough and fly away. Okay, but this very nest has been on this lamp now for, I'd say, at least 10 years. So we've had phoebes around this building for a long time, and they're back again. All right, so I'll get out of her way and go back to business. In this area of the property, this is a meadow/prairie area, and it's just gotten started growing this year, so there's not much out just yet. And this area I maintain with mowing and sometimes burning a little bit. It's a small spot, but that can help. So as you can see ahead of me here, we have bird boxes set up. A couple of bluebird boxes. These are your standard bluebird boxes. And another thing out there I'll point out to you in a second. Let's take a look at what's happening in this bluebird box. Okay, it's a very standard bluebird box. You see my hand there for scale. And let's see what's happening for this year. Oh, would you look at that? There's baby bluebirds in there. I hope that this is visible on camera. Okay, but there are, oh gosh, about 5 or 6 babies in there right now. Okay, I don't want to disturb them too much, but looks like there's been some success. I didn't even get a chance to clean this box out to start the spring. So you can see they just build their nest on top of the old nest. You eventually will have to clean that out because it just simply gets too full. But it's succeeding, as you can see. So I'll put them away, and we'll go look at our other box and see what's happening. Door there. Okay, so Mom will be back around, and Dad, okay, feeding those things occasionally. All right, so out here, this is what's called a martin house for purple martins. And unfortunately, in this property, we've never had purple martins in that house. And interestingly, not many other birds seem to use it at all. What seems to use it are wasps. I can see that there's a nest in there right now. There are bees coming out of it, or wasps. I can't tell yet from here. They're paper wasps, I see. Sometimes there'll be a big nest of like a bald-faced hornet hanging at the bottom of that. But maybe that's why the purple martins won't use it. Actually, we're not quite in the right kind of situation for purple martins. They like to be near water, near ponds and lake edges, marshy areas. And so I don't really have any of that here in this particular property. For any of you watching this, this is the spot where we did the maple syrup boiling. Okay, that episode. So, all right, so nothing much happening at the martin house. Let's look at this bluebird box. Now this one I have not checked. I don't think it's occupied. It looks empty. And that's true. Nothing going on. Looks like something started to try to build a nest, but didn't continue. So, no bluebirds in that box. This property, as long as I've had it, has had bluebirds. Sometimes a dozen bluebirds will be around this property. But at the very least, there's always a mating pair or two around here. And again, these bluebirds can have more than one brood per year. Butterflies are starting to pick up. There's a lot of birds, other birds I'm hearing wood thrushes in the background. One of my favorite, that's probably my favorite bird song in the world, is a wood thrush. And I've seen pileated woodpeckers today, brown thrashers, and some other things. I'm also seeing some butterflies out. There's a little white butterfly. I'm going to try to get near. It's one we study. It's called the falcate orange-tip butterfly. It's a little white butterfly. It only flies once. Well, has one flight season in the spring. It lays its eggs on our native spring mustards. And the reason we study it is sometimes it makes mistakes and lays its eggs on garlic mustard, which is an invasive mustard. And the unfortunate thing is that their larvae die when they try to feed on garlic mustard. So here it is in front of me. This is called a falcate orange tip. It has little orange tips on its white wings on the upper side. And on its underside, it's sort of camouflaged. So when it rests and folds its wings together, it's kind of very camouflaged. But this is a male flying around, and it doesn't seem to be interested in feeding. It's probably looking for a mate at the moment. So these things are interesting. Their main host plant, there, it's nectaring. Let's see if we can get close to it now. Their main host plant is cut-leaf toothwort, is one of them. Oh, here it came at me. It's flying away. It was nectaring on a spring beauty. Here it is again. Try to get close to that. It's tough. They're fairly tame butterflies, but they're small and they can flutter around pretty fast, so they're tough to catch. Here in person, I can clearly see those bright orange wingtips. Try to get closer to it. Hopefully you can see it there. Okay, nectaring on spring beauties. And then eventually it will need to mate, and the females will lay eggs on, again, cut-leaf toothwort is a preferred host, and hopefully avoid garlic mustard. But they do seem to be attracted to garlic mustard, unfortunately. And again, every time they do that, they waste their eggs. So we would call a plant like that an ecological trap or an evolutionary trap, because it's like basically the butterfly's throwing away its eggs every time it makes that mistake. And so, okay, so I see one here. might be the one we are watching, but I see another one in the distance. So there are a couple flying around here. There's not an abundance of cutleaf toothwort on this particular property, but in the woods above and next door, there's quite a bit. So I'll explore what I can see at some point here, and basically leave you with that for now. Sometimes it's incredible the size of the ponds or puddles that frogs will put their eggs in, or salamanders too. So on this property, there's I dug a little pond here. This pond is probably, let's see, that's about 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, about a foot deep at its deepest. It's just a puddle, really. And right now, it's absolutely full of tadpoles. I hope some of those are visible. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, but it's absolutely filled with little black tadpoles. I'm not entirely sure of the species of frog that those represent. I've had different species in this pond before. Wood frogs would be one that I'd suspect, but I'm not sure. When I come over here, I see an adult jump in, and it's always, you know, I can never really see it before it takes off. So there's still an adult or two around this pond. But it's interesting, this little puddle, as long as it holds water long enough, we get frequent enough rains here for a couple of weeks, these tadpoles can make it through to adulthood and, you know, become a whole bunch of adult frogs. So that's a little frog pond in this property, and not yet another one of these little spring highlights. There's heavy deer pressure on this property. I probably mentioned that a time or two. And it's pretty much true throughout all of Ohio. But there is one species here that seems to tolerate deer, or deer don't like it as much, or it's just simply too numerous and successful for them to mow down entirely. And that's this species you see just literally carpeting the ground here. Almost looks like an invasive species, but for once, this thing is not an invasive species. This plant is called bellflower. Okay, so it has these nodding yellow flowers, and the stalks that perforate the leaves, we would call those perfoliate leaves, and with a slight zigzag to the stem. Look at it carefully. But this species really does well in the face of deer pressure. In places where you have a lot of deer, the plant community you often get is basically the only thing that is left are the things that deer don't like, or that can tolerate deer's browsing and not die. And so this is a species that when it comes to recommendations about what to plant in the face of deer, this one's really does well. And again, I don't know that it's deterrent or toxic to deer or whatever, but I don't see a great deal of grazing or browsing on it. And it's surely abundant in this property, and there are plenty of deer that move through this spot every day, really, in their typical feeding rounds. So anyhow, bellflower. If you have deer issues and you want a native plant in your yard, that might be a good choice for you. There's a patch of pawpaws on this property we planted probably 15 years ago. They went through numerous assaults along the way. They got frozen back a few times. Deer have damaged them. But finally last year, you can see the size of the tree in front of me here, they started to flower. I didn't get any pawpaw fruits here last year, but they have flowered abundantly this year. Okay, so here's a patch. This was the initial tree that was planted in the first place. And if you watched my pawpaw episode, I talked about how these things sprout from their roots. So there's numerous individuals all around this center individual that are all genetically related. They're a clone of the original planted tree. Okay, so they're all genetically identical. And pawpaws need genetically different individuals in order to cross-pollinate each other. And so I do have those scattered around here. Okay, in the distance, in all directions, there's pawpaws of different genotypes planted. And as I looked around this tree, I first looked at the flowers, these flowers that look withered. And I thought, oh darn, they got frozen again this year. But in reality, they have very much been successfully pollinated and are starting to grow fruit. Okay, so this tree is actually loaded already with little baby pawpaw fruits. So let me just show you that up close. All right, so if you see the little bunch of fruits on that branch, kind of like a little bunch of bananas at this point. I guess there's going to be 4 in that bunch. There's another little bunch of 3 or so. I'm seeing those all over this tree. Okay, here's another. These are just withered petals after the flower's been pollinated successfully. The petals will wither and fall. And there they are. Those are baby pawpaws here at, I think we're in April 28th today. So these things will grow all season, all summer, be ready to harvest in early September, early to mid-September. But these trees are loaded, so it's awesome. Pawpaw patch is really going to come in this year. And the only thing that could hurt these things at this point is if we still got a hard frost, which could happen. Hopefully it won't. But these trees are set to be loaded with pawpaws. Cool. There are several trees and shrubs flowering at this time of year around this property. And one of the stars at the moment is flowering dogwood. Okay, this tree that you see in front of you. Okay, this is a wild plant. It grows all around this property. Of course, this is one of the most widely planted shrubs in the world, probably, for these large, quote, flowers that they produce. But flowering dogwood was actually kind of interesting. These large white things that we would generally refer to as petals are actually not petals. Okay, they're called bracts. And the actual flowers of a dogwood are just in the center disc of each of these structures. Okay, so in this case, these structures called bracts are essentially serving the purpose of petals in attracting pollinators to this tree. Okay, but they're actually not petals. All right, the flowers are much reduced, very small, and that's where all the action happens. And of course, flowering dogwood in the fall, once those flowers get pollinated and start to set fruit, they produce a fruit that turns bright red in the fall that birds like and carry around. And so there are flowering dogwoods now planted naturally by birds all over this property. Okay, so one of the stars right now is flowering dogwood, and it will be flowering, for another week or so, and then these will start to fade and drop off. All right, flowering dogwood. Let me show you a little bit about variation in tree flowering and leaf out. Trees vary quite a bit in when they leaf out. Now, their leaf out is a trait that's basically, evolved, an evolved trait to match the environment where the tree lives, so that they don't generally leaf out too early and risk getting frozen, or leaf out too late and lose out on competition for light, for example. But nonetheless, trees vary quite a bit in their rates of leaf out in the spring. So here again, we are in April 28th, 2024. And to the right of me is a pretty big 3-trunk tulip tree that's probably halfway through its leaf expansion. Okay, those leaves over there are probably about half the size that they're going to be, but you could see how far along it is. It's quite advanced. Okay, now right in front of me with this deer guard at the base here is a white ash that I rescued that's so far still alive, has not been attacked by emerald ash borer, although they are in the area. And it also has not leafed out. It's just starting up there. It broke bud, it's just starting. What I did want to show you on this tree is what tree flowers can look like. And tree flowers are often very different than flowers you might see on a small herbaceous plant. I mean, it's just tons of variation. These are the flowers of a white ash tree. I want to get this on film before we can't see this anymore. All right, you see they basically have, they're just very reduced. They really don't have petals, nothing showy. Okay, they are generally wind pollinated. Okay, so they don't really need to attract insects. You know, we have a lot of large or hardwood trees like oaks, for example. You know, they have reduced flowers. They have flowers that hang, droop down as catkins, and they're not trying to attract insects. Okay, they're wind pollinated. So those are the flowers of an ash tree. And again, this tree is just barely broken bud. Here's a northern red oak. And again, those leaves are also about half to 1/3 the size they're going to be when that's fully mature. So those leaves are in the process of expanding. It will take them a week or so to get fully expanded. But you can see it's leafed out far ahead of the white ash. And here's a black walnut. Okay, if you look at this black walnut this time of year, it looks like it might be dead, but it's not. Okay, it's just starting to break bud. Let's see. Okay, there's the buds. That one's pretty well still closed, but this tree is completely alive. It just breaks bud later than the other species I just showed you. Okay, and then of course here's maples, and maples are pretty far along. That happens to be a silver maple in front of us there, but out in the distance, the trees that are pretty well leafed out over there are red maples. Okay, and so red maples are pretty early as well, as you can see. That's just a little bit about variation in leaf out. We're sort of right into this transition period where some trees are pretty far along. Others still look like they're, you know, in the middle of winter. But within about 2 weeks or so, most trees will be pretty well leafed out around here, around this area. And this area is what you would call an old field. So this particular plot of land was basically previously forest. It was forested probably going back 60 years. And then it was deforested, okay? The first owner of this land who built the house on it basically cut down all the trees in this plot of land. And I acquired this property, 13 years ago now. And this field was still an open field, okay? It was kind of a rough field. It would get mowed about once a year. And I did that once or twice for the first 2 years, but for about 10 years, I've let it go. And then I've just mown some trails through this area for walking, and periodically mown in and around the shrubs and trees that I'm allowing to grow back in this area, partly to keep out invasives. We have a lot of problems with invasives like multiflora rose, Japanese honeysuckle, and things like that in this area. Okay, so this old field is now coming back. In the more open areas, it still has plenty of goldenrods. This area in front of me here would be filled with goldenrods later in the season. But it also has a lot of shrubs and trees that are early colonizers. Okay, so that they come in early in these sort of fields that are let go to regrow. And so that does include those flowering dogwoods. So there's a large flowering dogwood, you know, probably helps seed in a lot of the small ones that you're seeing flowering in this area, and I just showed you earlier. Okay, there's lots of red cedars or junipers, all right? Very common early colonizer. Okay, I planted oaks in this area, okay, quite a few. So here's one at an earlier stage of leaf out compared to the one I showed you earlier. White and red oaks. Black cherries. Okay, this is a black cherry tree that's colonized here. There was a persimmon tree in this field, one single persimmon tree that basically was cut down before I acquired the property, and it, through root suckering, has generated dozens of persimmons all throughout this patch. So they leaf out pretty late as well, and so there's dozens of persimmons mixed in here. They're all clones of that parent tree that used to be here. Okay, so unfortunately they will not set fruit because of that. Okay, now there's one interesting shrub here I want to point out, and it's a nice one. It's this one right in front of us here. Okay, it's right at its flowering stage. It's probably a couple days from its peak. I see a lot of flowers are just starting to become open. Okay, this is called deerberry. Okay, deerberry, very cool. It's a blueberry relative. Okay, anybody who's picked blueberries will take a look at this and say, yeah, that kind of looks like a blueberry bush that I'm familiar with. Okay, so here's one that's just loaded with flowers. Okay, one thing about this species is its specific epithet in its scientific name is staminifera. That's because the stamens in these flowers protrude out of the flowers, and they're very prominent. Okay, those little things poking out of these little white flowers, those are the stamens, the male parts of the flower. Okay, so there's deerberry all throughout here. What else is in here? Okay, there are tulip trees that have seeded in, plenty of maples, plenty of dogwoods, as I've shown you. And all of these species are things that generally have seeds that can fly in or that birds will move in very easily because they have a fruit that birds find appealing. Okay, here's one, a little different. This is a black haw viburnum. Okay, black haw. So this is a native shrub. It's in the honeysuckle family, but it's a native viburnum. Okay, that cluster of flowers there will produce a cluster of fruits, and undoubtedly that's how this shrub got in here. Okay, and so this is just a little bit about old field biology. And, you know, as basically the person kind of managing this property at the moment, I've been selecting what I want to keep, trying to keep out what I don't want, and slowly letting this regrow back into forest. All right, now, again, as this progresses and things like the tulip trees grow to prominence, the maples, the oaks that I put in here, the black cherries, the larger hardwood trees, eventually they'll produce enough shade that these smaller things, the red cedars, will get shaded out. Okay, the smaller shrubs will start to get shaded out, and the dogwoods even can get shaded out in deep shade. All right, so the nature of the area changes with time as things grow, but it is a quite biodiverse area. You know, birds love this spot. You know, lots of animals love this spot. So I'm just sort of marshaling it along through successioning. In this spot, these are just the old seed pods of dogbane. Okay, this is a milkweed relative, and they make these skinny pods filled with these seeds with sort of fluff attached to them. That, of course, is a dispersal mechanism for these things. All right. So this is a native plant related to milkweeds called dogbane. And that's basically last year's crop. In the distance over there was Sugar Shack 2024. So I'm just in the vicinity of where we did that, but something that's at the peak of its flowering right now is this species. This is wild blue phlox. And it's basically, we transplanted a few individuals into this area just from another place on the property. And it's flourished all along this bank and done quite well. Here's an interesting thing about refuges, okay? Deer kind of leave phlox alone somewhat, but they will eat them, okay? But you can see that in this little patch right here, it's tucked away here. There's blackberry vines, raspberry canes. There's a particular patch right there in the midst of all this stuff that's protected from deer. You would call that a refuge. Okay, that little spot being protected as though it were fenced is just flourishing. Okay, it's really dense, flowering very well. And that's all a function of being tucked away and protected from deer, okay, which these ones out in the open are exposed to. Of course, they hang pretty well in the face of deer, but deer will eat them and can, you know, knock them back periodically. I had mentioned milkweeds and dogbane earlier as being relatives, and so I found an interesting spot here where the two of them are growing side by side. So this plant right here is common milkweed. Beautiful pink flowers that smell just wonderful. Of course, is one of the main host plants for monarch butterfly caterpillars. And right beside it is a dogbane. Okay, you can see the similarities, the family characteristics in the leaves. They're both kind of soft and furry, downy. The stems are quite similar, kind of purplish, thick, fleshy. And they both produce a milk, okay, when they're broken open. Okay, so that sap there, that milky latex, has compounds in it that are defensive for the plant. And in particular in milkweeds, here's a spot, maybe you could see it coming off the dogbane there. That's filled with something called cardinalides, which are poisons that will affect your heart. They're cardiac glycosides. And those compounds form the basis of the mutualism or the coevolutionary relationship between monarch butterflies and milkweed. Okay, where the butterflies, the caterpillars, feed on that plant and they tolerate that latex, that toxin quite well in that latex. And they incorporate it into their hemolymph in their body and in their tissues. And so the caterpillars are toxic, which make them distasteful for predators. And that toxicity carries over to the adults. You know, the beautiful orange and black spotted monarch butterflies that everybody enjoys. And so that toxin gives those things some release from predation. And of course, they've had to evolve the ability to tolerate that stuff because it's toxic, it's costly to deal with that. But because they can, other species can't or haven't invested in that, so to speak. And that gives monarch caterpillars sort of easy access to this plant, and while it excludes most other herbivores. Okay, there's a few other specialist herbivores on milkweed as well. I'll point those out as the season goes. But there's a very good milkweed patch in this meadow right here. And so I'll be sure to revisit this later in the season once things grow up and start to flower. So this is a really great patch of flowers and grasses later in the season. In this meadow, there's a mix of desirable plants and some undesirables as well, native and non-native. This grass is a native grass. It's quite aggressive, actually. Okay, it's called deer tongue grass because it's kind of, when it's mature, it's kind of rough, like a tongue would be, and sort of shaped like the tongue of a deer. Right, so deer tongue grass, quite abundant in this meadow. But here's one that we don't want. This is an aggressive non-native species. All these little seedlings, these light green seedlings, are Japanese stilt grass. Okay, that's an invasive species. It's an annual plant, so all these are seedlings. They've come up from seeds that rained down into this area last year. And so anywhere there's a little gap, they fill it. That's a very aggressive invasive species. You know, people sort of worry about different species, non-native versus native, and aggressive versus non-aggressive. And not all non-native species are a big issue. In fact, some of the ones that we've paid a lot of attention to over the years really aren't as bad as they were made out to be. This one is amazing. This thing has spread across this property in the last 10 years steadily from sources in the area somewhere. And it's tough to get rid of, okay? Because, in order to get rid of that stuff, as a grass, you kind of have to get rid of everything here. And so one of the things you can do to manage this one is, because it's an annual, it sets seed once a year. And so you can mow it and basically, or try to mow it or kill it right when it's flowering before it sets seed, and sort of reduce its destroy its reproductive effort for the year. That's one strategy. You could run around and try to spray all this stuff, but that would be largely ineffective. You'd end up making bare patches that would just be colonized by more seeds the following year. So this is a tough one. One of the best defenses is probably just an abundance of native species to serve as biological resistance to the invasion of this species. And so in this area, as I look around, for example, it is really occupying areas that are kind of more bare for whatever reason, partly because of it was there. Okay, it outcompeted things and prevented things from growing. Those areas I could go back into those areas and reseed them with good stuff or plant transplants to get some things back in there in these patches where the seedlings are taking off. So I might work on that. Of course, there's tons of things to work on all the time. But yeah, so that's something we don't want here, that's here, and we're just sort of working to deal with. The last thing I'd like to show you today is this tree that I collected today. I think by now that most of you know that I've gotten into bonsai the last few years. I've done a couple episodes on making bonsais, styling and repotting and things like that. And so what I'm going to talk about here today is the process of collecting wild trees and then taking them into domestication, so to speak, and styling them in the shape of a bonsai. Okay, nature is the best, producer of bonsais in the world. And what bonsai artists try to do, and I'm not there yet, but is to mimic what nature can do. All right, through the sort of exposure to the elements, exposure to herbivores like deer, freezing, wind, bad soils, all those kinds of things can lead to some very interesting shapes and gnarled trunks and scarring and things like that that are all desirable traits in bonsai. And so beeches, this is an American beech. Okay, beeches make good subjects for bonsai, partly because they're stout trees. Okay, they grow slowly, pretty slowly. They're stout trees. They take pruning well, and they can bounce back from being pruned and styled quite well. And they're long-lived. And out in nature, you can find them growing in some interesting places that give them a lot of character. All right, so on this property, there are beeches all around the area. Okay, but there are places where beeches will grow, where there are thinner soils, rock outcroppings, places where deer have been able to nip at them for years. And so you're left with sometimes, smaller, gnarly, old-looking trees that are actually still quite small. All right, so this tree I collected from a spot like that. And, I collected it because it has several traits that are desirable in bonsai. It has some really nice movement, as we call it, to the trunk. Okay, and that's basically as a result of, normally it would be a nice, straight, tall tree if it had experienced no insults throughout its life. But, it might have been broken over at some point. It might have been, its terminal bud might have been chewed off by a deer at some point. It was growing in kind of some real hard clay soil, so its root root system was not very deep, so it couldn't penetrate the soil very far. So this is a quite old tree. Okay, it's probably at its thickest here at the base, about 1.5 inches in diameter, maybe. This tree could easily be 30 to 40 years old. Okay, the only way you would know is to cut it and count the rings on it. Okay, but it's because of the area it was growing, I know it's a lot older than it might look. But I really like this movement, the thickness of the trunk, of course, which is a desirable thing in bonsai. Again, what you're trying to do is give the appearance of an older, mature tree at a small scale. Okay, that's the whole idea. All right, so the practice of collecting wild trees to bring into the bonsai world is called, would be called a yamadori. Okay, that's the collection of wild trees for bonsai. Of course, they require shaping and styling and pruning and things like that through time. And ideally, I would have collected this about a month ago or so, before these buds have broken. Okay, because it's a lot better to collect these things when they're dormant, and basically get their root system happy before they bud out. Okay, but I wasn't able to catch this one. It had started to bud out. And so I brought it back to the place as quickly as I could, got its root zone, minimized enough to fit into this little just training pot, mixed in with some soil and a lot of water, okay, trying to keep it moist. The whole goal is just to keep this thing alive for now. I'm not going to probably won't try to put it into a nice bonsai pot even this whole year. I'll just let it develop in this pot for a while, let the roots grow out, and make sure that these leaves stay green. So I've already pruned it back quite a bit. I don't know what the final styling of this tree might look like, but this is a start, and the whole goal is just to keep this thing alive, get it back to my my bonsai workshop in my garage, and start it on its journey to becoming a formal bonsai. Okay, so look for more episodes regarding this tree in the future, and more episodes of The Naturalist in the future. Okay, so with that, I'm going to bid you adieu for the day. And just as a reminder to like and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy what you're seeing. I appreciate that. And again, you'll be able to see when new episodes come out. And I appreciate the support. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.